It began with a notice, folded neatly inside a plain envelope with the Homeowners Association seal stamped across the top. The paper was stiff, the font formal, and the message clear. Effective immediately, outdoor barbecues are strictly prohibited within the neighborhood. The reasoning, at least on paper, sounded official. They claimed smoke posed a nuisance, smells were disruptive, and grills created a fire hazard. But everyone knew the truth. This wasn't about safety. This was about control. For years, the HOA had been tightening its grip on the community. First, it was mailbox paint colors. Only 3 shades were allowed. Then it was a length of holiday decorations. 10 days maximum or face a fine. Slowly, traditions that gave the neighborhood its warmth were stripped away, one rule at a time. And now, they had come for barbecues. In our neighborhood, barbecues weren't just about food. They were about connection. Families gathered around grills on summer evenings. Neighbors exchanged plates of ribs or skewers, and kids darted between yards chasing fireflies. It was messy, smoky, loud, and it was ours. To take that away was to suffocate the last bit of spirit the neighborhood had left. The mastermind behind the ban was the HOA president, Mrs. Whitaker. She was a woman who lived for order, for silence, for power. Her yard was immaculate, her blinds always drawn, her lips always pursed. People said she filed noise complaints if she heard laughter after 9 p.m. Others whispered she once measured a neighbor's grass with a ruler. Whether true or not, everyone believed it, because it fit perfectly with who she was. When the notice arrived, most of my neighbors sighed in resignation. They had seen this play before. Argue and you got fined. Resist, and the HOA dragged you through months of paperwork. Most people learned to keep their heads down, their grills covered, and their voices quiet. But I wasn't wired that way. That night, I walked into my backyard and stared at my old charcoal grill. It wasn't fancy, just a black round kettle, rusted on the edges, with years of meals etched into its surface. I thought about the birthday parties, the late-night burgers, the way my dad used to flip steaks on it when I was a kid. That grill wasn't just metal. It was memory, and Mrs. Whitaker wanted it gone. I started reading the fine print of the notice. The HOA had banned individual outdoor cooking activities involving open flame. The wording struck me. They weren't just banning gas or charcoal. They wanted to eliminate the act itself, the culture. That realization lit something inside me. I thought about the way neighbors used to linger after dinner, beer bottles clinking as conversations drifted into the night. I thought about how kids loved sneaking an extra marshmallow off the grill during Esmores nights. And I thought about how, slowly, all of that had vanished under Mrs. Whitaker's rule. But what if we took it back? I didn't want to break the rule quietly, in secret, sneaking burgers in the shadows like a criminal. That would only prove her right, that she held power over us. No, if I was going to do this, it had to be loud. It had to be big. That's when the idea took root. If the HOA banned barbecues, I would throw the biggest one the neighborhood had ever seen. Not a small get-together. Not a backyard dinner. A full-blown block party. The thought made me grin. I could already see Mrs. Whitaker's face when she turned the corner and saw an entire street lined with grills, smoke rising like a signal fire, neighbors laughing, music playing. It would be the kind of rebellion she couldn't find a way. But planning something like this wasn't simple. The HOA thrived on surveillance. They had patrols, nosy neighbors, and of course, Mrs. Whitaker herself, who seemed to appear whenever you stepped one toe out of line. If I wanted to pull this off, I had to be careful. Over the next few days, I started quietly sounding out my neighbors. At first, people were hesitant. They were tired, beaten down, worried about fines or worse. But when I explained my vision, something changed in their eyes. The Johnsons, who hadn't hosted their annual July cookout in years, said they missed the sound of sizzling food. The Rodriguezes remembered how their son used to invite friends over for taco nights with grilled carne asada. Even old Mr. Thompson, who rarely spoke more than a few words, admitted he still had a smoker in his garage. One by one, the hesitation gave way to something else. Hope. It was fragile at first, but it was there. We began whispering plans over fences, texting encoded messages, pretending we were discussing garage sales when really we were mapping out grills, food, and supplies. People volunteered coolers, folding chairs, even extension cords for string lights. It felt like we were building something bigger than a party. We were building a movement. Still, I couldn't shake the risk. The HOA had rules for everything, and Mrs. Whitaker had a way of making examples out of anyone who dared cross her. Fines were one thing. Lawsuits were another. And she wasn't above calling the police to enforce her power. If this block party went wrong, it could get ugly. But as I stood in my backyard one evening, staring at the dull gray sky and the silent street, I knew what the real risk was. Doing nothing. Letting her win. Letting another piece of our neighborhood's spirit be erased. No, I thought, not this time. The band was supposed to silence us. Instead, it had given us something to rally around. The question wasn't whether I would host the block party. The question was how big it could get before Mrs. Whitaker realized what was happening. And so, the planning began in earnest. Secret sign-ups, hidden coolers, quiet promises. The band had lit the spark. The block party would light the fire. By the time the last rays of sunlight slipped behind the rooftops, our block was unrecognizable. String lights zigzagged across the street, glowing like stars pulled down from the sky. Grills lined both sides, their flames reflecting in the wide eyes of children clutching hot dogs and marshmallows on skewers. Music poured from speakers on porches, blending into the crackle of charcoal and the low hum of voices rising into the summer night. What started as rebellion had transformed into a festival. Neighbors who had once barely nodded at each other were now laughing, swapping recipes, trading plates pile high with ribs, brisket, kebabs, and corn. Folding chairs spilled into the street, and coolers of ice had opened, bottles clinking as hands reached in. The smell of barbecue hung heavy in the air, drifting far beyond our block, luring people from other streets who came just to see what was happening. It was joy, raw and loud and untamed, and it was something the HOA could never control. But not everyone was celebrating. At the far end of the street stood Mrs. Whitaker, the president of the HOA, clipboard in hand, lips drawn into a razor-thin line. She looked like a general watching her army defect. She had arrived earlier with the expectation that her presence alone would bring the party to a halt. Normally it would have. People would have seen her sharp eyes, her clipboard, and scattered in fear fines. But this time she was invisible.